This presentation by Carole Knight with University of Georgia is part of a 6-part series organized by Fort Valley State University, Dr. Niki Whitley, and Stefan Price with AgriUnity, Mr. Handy Kennedy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Carole Knight. I am the Beef Quality Assurance Program Coordinator for Georgia. I'm also an extension agent in Madison County, so I'm located in Danielsville, which is about 20 minutes from Athens. So what I would like, I guess let me back up and also say that my husband and I also are cow-calf producers. So we're in the cattle business as well. So I take a lot of this education stuff very near and dear to my heart, in that we try to practice what I preach, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at there. So we're putting a lot of this into practice on our own farm. So what I wanted to do tonight, we don't really have the time to go through and get everybody certified through beef quality assurance, although we're currently working with Dr. Lee Jones and I think Dr. Whitley and Stefan and Mr. Kennedy. We're talking about providing some opportunities to get some producers certified, hopefully beginning in the spring. But what I wanted to talk with you guys tonight is about the Beef Quality Assurance Program and really about beef quality in general. So we're going to back up and talk about that. And then talk about the program and some of the guiding principles that it's based on. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of opportunity for some questions. What I wanted to start with is, how do you define quality beef? And, all too often that term quality beef is used within our industry very loosely, because that can be a very subjective question. It's your opinion of what do you place value on when you use the term quality. So, although it makes us feel good to proclaim that U.S. beef is the world's best, we kind of need to put the term quality beef into perspective or into context when we're talking about quality assurance. So I read a really cute quote of talking about quality beef, and someone answered that question is, it depends on who the cook is, right? So a lot of how we rate quality is going to be on that eating and preparation characteristics. But consistently, quality is defined as, consumer expectations for eating and palatability, right? So they want it to taste good, okay? The other thing we're going to use to define quality beef is how safely it is produced and harvested. And so we are on the production end, and that's what this quality assurance does, is teaches us how to produce quality beef. On the harvest side of it, those beef products are harvested and processed under very strict government inspection systems that ensure that it's safe and wholesome and correctly labeled and packaged. Okay, so just some things to keep in mind as we go through this presentation and really looking at how we view quality and what that means to us. So before we jump into the nuts and bolts of beef quality assurance, I wanted to provide you guys with a little foundation to base this on. So when we send beef to a harvest facility, when it leaves our farms, so if we're selling feeder calves, it leaves our farms and it goes through a sale barn or through a special sale or load lots or however it's marketed. And then it's sent mostly out west, because that's where most of the feed yards are, to a feeder who's going to then feed it as economically as they can to get that animal to the correct endpoint. And then it's going to go to the packer. And the packing industry is where harvest occurs. Okay. And so in those packing houses, after that animal is harvested, and then you have these sides of carcasses that are hanging up, is where carcass grading occurs, and that's how the packers get paid, right? Is after those carcasses are graded, because they're paid based on how well they grade, okay? And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because some of the terms that we use when we talk about quality are some of the same terms and things that we're going to look at in this grading system. So beef carcass grading is divided into two separate types of grades. You have quality grades, which you see there's 8 of them listed there: prime, choice, select, standard, commercial, utility, cutter, and canner. Prime, choice, select, and sometimes standard are the only ones that you're going to see in a meat case. Everything else goes on to usually be used in some sort of further processing. So, they'll take some of those grades, they'll add some fat to it to make ground beef. They'll take some of them and they'll end up being cooked, prepackaged products. And then you have yield grades, which are numbers, right? So yield grades are 1 through 5. And 1 is the highest yielding. So let's look at the differences in the two and what we're actually grading or measuring when they're assigning these grades. So quality grades are, the official definition is to segregate carcasses into palatability groups based on the expected eating quality. And so what they're using is the degree of maturity of the carcass, so how old the animal was that the carcass, how old the carcass is, and also marbling score, okay? And marbling is the fat that's found inside the muscle. So that's intramuscular fat. It's those white flecks that you see in a steak when you purchase it from the meat market. It is that wonderful, yummy fat that when you throw that steak on the grill, it melts, right? So that fat melts inside the meat, and it's what makes it tender and juicy and delicious, right? So those two different characteristics are what's going to help determine what the quality grade is. So the degree of maturity is determined on the rail. So the carcass hanging on the rail, they're going to look at it and they're going to determine the approximate age of that carcass. Okay. So, no information is following that carcass down the line. It doesn't come with a tag that says this was Carole's steer and he was, 12 months old. That they're not keeping up with that. They are solely looking at the carcass and using characteristics on it to be able to determine its maturity. Okay. And so when you see carcasses hanging on the rail, and let's see if I can get back, like this one in this picture here. So you'll notice that those carcasses are split down the center. Okay. And so it's basically split right down the spinal column, and you end up with 2 halves. And so what that does is exposes that spinal column. So a grader comes along and looks at that spinal column, and spinal processes, the bones that stick together to make the spine. If you've ever seen them or seen the bones of one, they kind of make a T, right? And so the ends of those spinal processes, as that animal matures, it turns from cartilage to bone. So they look to see how much of those little spines that stick out in the vertebrae have turned from cartilage to bone, and that determines the maturity class. So if it's mostly cartilage, it's probably going to fall in the A maturity class. If it's begun to ossify or turn to bone, then the animal is more mature and they base their maturity grade on that. Okay? That's kind of a difficult explanation, but to say they have very experienced people that do that look at this ossification and assign a maturity level to these carcasses. Most all of what, anything you're going to see in the meat case is coming from that A maturity class. You get much past that, you're into cull cows, that B, C, D, E, and they're not going to fall in our primary quality grades. Okay. The other measurement that's used to determine quality grade is the marbling. And we talked about that being that intramuscular fat. So all of the white flecks that are found inside the muscle. And you see there are 6 marbling scores listed here. And in between each of these marbling scores, there's 100 degrees. So you can have a slight 20. You can have a modest 50. You can have a slightly abundant 80. Okay. So you got lots of scores to deal with. Now, used to, in the packing houses, you had a grader that visually looked at these ribeye areas and they assigned a score. Now, that was a very subjective process in that, you know, what I might have viewed as one thing, somebody else might have viewed as another, and it came under a lot of scrutiny as to how consistent that was in the packing houses. So, luckily, now the packing houses rely heavily on instrument grading. So they take a really cool computer system that takes a picture of this ribeye area, which is the ribeye between the 12th and 13th ribs. Let's see, let me go back to this. You see how these carcasses are split there? They kind of look like a Pac-Man hanging there, kind of open. That open face of the ribeye there is between the 12th and the 13th ribs, and that's where they take the measurements, like the marbling measurements from, as well as a ribeye area, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So they use a computer to look at the differences between the red and the white to determine marbling score. It's a lot of studies have been done. It's very consistent. It works really well. So they take the marbling score, they take the maturity of that carcass, and that's how they assign a quality grade. So you see that quality grade prime has slightly abundant marbling. So we go back to our picture here and we see that that's really on that heavy end. So prime cuts of beef have a lot of marbling. So they're going to taste better, right? Choice is that moderate to small. Select gets into that slight measurement of marbling, and then you get down into standard, which really doesn't have very much marbling at all. So, you know, it's a give and take. You know, if I am looking at quality defined in my eyes, I'm going to want something with a lot of marbling to it. I'm going to want something on that high choice prime end because I know how wonderful that's going to taste when I cook it. Now, your health conscious consumer might go for something in that low choice or select end because marbling is still fat, and they might look at it as, you know, I don't want as much fat, red meat fat in my diet. Okay. So yes, prime is the best tasting, but is it the one that sells quantity in it as much? No. You're probably looking in that really that mid to low choice range is probably the beef that sells the most or the most popular. It's also going to be cheaper than something in that prime range. I mean, you're going to get prime beef at, you know, your high-end steakhouses, or you're going to pay a nice penny for it purchasing from the meat case. However, those carcasses are rewarded for being graded prime, and they will get a premium when they're coming off the harvest line. Okay, let's switch gears just a minute and let's talk about yield grades. Okay. So yield grades don't care at all about how that beef tastes, okay? It has strictly to do with the cutability of that carcass. So how much red meat is going to be harvested off of that carcass. So the expected yield of closely trimmed boneless retail cuts from the round, loin, rib, and chuck, which are our primals. So we only care about how much beef is there. So this just gives you a visual look at what that looks like. So a yield grade 1, which is our highest yield grade, has greater than 52.3% of closely trimmed boneless retail cuts, all the way down to a 5, which has less than 45%. Now, this grade is not subjective at all because it's a math problem. So we're just plugging numbers, that measurements, into a big math problem. So the factors that are used to determine our yield grade include the subcutaneous fat thickness. That's a fancy way of saying back fat. Okay, so it's the back fat at the 12th rib of the animal. It also includes the hot carcass weight. So after that carcass is dressed and is ready to go into the cooler, they'll weigh it. The area of that ribeye muscle that we just looked at marbling in, and then the percent of kidney pelvic heart fat. Now, kidney pelvic heart fat is the internal fat of the animal. So that's all of the fat that buffers and protects the organs on the inside of the animal. And so it also is all going to get trimmed out, but it plays a part in determining this yield grade. So looking at this math problem, what I want you to notice about it, let's see if I can get my handy dandy pointer over here, is we start with a base of 2.5, and then we add to that number with adjusted fat thickness and percent kph. So the amount of fat that the animal has on it makes our yield grade higher, which is bad, remember, because 1 is the best. But we're going to take away, so see our minus here, ribeye area and hot carcass weight. So the bigger the ribeye area, the heavier the carcass, the better our yield grade is going to be. So fat thickness and the amount of muscle are going to counter each other and weigh heavily on what that yield grade is going to be. Okay? Remember, we don't care a lick about how it tastes. This is only about how much beef there is. Okay, so I did find this picture. I apologize for it being a little grainy if it comes through that way, but this is the instrument that they use. So that's somebody on the packing line taking a measurement for determining these grades. And so he has the little box and he sets it over the ribeye area. You see his computer screen here on the back side. And so it figures marbling, it measures the ribeye area. It also takes that fat thickness for them. So it's become a very streamlined process for grading these carcasses on the line. And this is just one tool we have in determining whether we're producing quality beef, right? So we have industry standards that we want to strive for because, you know, we want to make the most money. So if we're producing animals that ultimately are going to grade well on the rail, then hopefully we would be receiving a premium for them on our end. Now, if you're just selling calves at a sale barn, just, you know, a handful at a time, you're not going to be rewarded for these. This comes from niche marketing or special marketing programs where you can put uniform load lots together and you can really sell the good things that you're doing, including beef quality assurance. Okay? Let's see. Let's stop right there. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Well, we'll keep rolling then. But please feel free to speak up if you have a question or we need to talk about something else. So one of the other ways that the industry as a whole looks at quality is self-analysis, right? How else can you see if you're doing everything right, unless you take a self-assessment? So the beef industry back in 1991 started the National Beef Quality Audit. And so this is run through the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the National Beef Board. It's funded through some checkoff dollars as well. Excuse me. And what this audit did was obtain information from all segments of the beef industry. So they did surveys and assessments with cow-calf producers, seed stock producers that were supplying seed stock to commercial producers, sale barns, feedlots, packing houses, supermarkets. I mean, it went through the entire chain of the industry and looked at beef quality problems that each segment identified. It also looked at management practices in each segment and how they affected that quality on the back end. So pretty cool. They've collected a lot of information. They do one, I think every, I want to say every 5 years, but I could be incorrect on that number. But they've done several at this point. UGA has gotten involved here recently because they also, so they do 2 different quality audits. One is for what we call the fed steer and heifer industry. So that's your conventional, feeder calves. They go to the feedlots. They're fed out to, about 18 to 24 months of age, and then they go to the packing house, right? That's what we call our fed steer and heifer market. But then you have the cull cow market, right? So anytime you send cows to the sale barn and they get picked up by a cull cow harvest facility like FPL, which is there in Augusta. And so that's really kind of a whole industry in and of itself. And it's a booming industry because the beef from those cull cow harvest facilities, supply a lot of beef to the food industry. And so, that's something that they needed to look at to make sure that we also had quality on that end of it. And so UGA was involved in helping survey some of those things. But what I wanted to share with you is some of the lessons learned or the things that were grabbed from those quality audits. And so some of the things that were identified in those audits, identified in all 4 audits, included excess external fat. So, there's a lot of genetics come into play when you're looking at excess external fat, but a lot of that has to do with what the markets are doing and how long those feedlots are holding those cattle to wait to sell them, right? So if they're having to hold them because they're waiting for a better price, a lot of times they put on more fat and then they get docked for it in the long run. Inadequate tenderness. So, like we talked about, marbling comes into play with tenderness, but some of that is genetic as well. So there are some, things that really can happen on a lot of ends of the sector to increase tenderness. Insufficient marbling, excess carcass and cut weight. So we were, at times, like I said, if we're holding animals and we're putting more and more weight on them, they're really getting too big. So contrary to what I eat in my diet, the recommended serving size for beef is really a 3-ounce serving, right? Who orders a 3-ounce steak? But that's really just the size of the palm of your hand. But when we get these like ginormous steaks that are, they look like T-Rex steaks, nobody's going to buy those. They're too big. They don't fit the box. So there's an appropriate size that is more marketable. Other things that were identified: hide problems, lack of uniformity, injection site lesions. And so these were things that were identified. I said identified in 2 audits. Those were in some of the early audits. And we'll talk about here in just a minute the good things that we've done to correct that. We don't see them as often. We don't see those lesions as often as we used to. So some things that have kind of popped up in the most recent audits: lack of traceability, the need for that instrument grading that the industry has heard, and they're doing that, and the need for communication among our sectors. And so, the beef industry is beginning to be unique in that it is not integrated like the poultry and the pork industry. Like packers are not contracting with us to get exactly, telling us what we have to do. We are able to manage and do this like we want to. However, we do need to supply a product that they want to purchase, right? So, that need for communication from the top down, we need to know from the packers and the feedlots, what do you want? Like, what is your ideal feeder calf look like, and what do we need to do to produce that?
Hey, Carole, this is Handy. I have a question. Is there any particular breed dealing with the first four that may be rated higher than a particular other breed? On your identify all four audits when it comes
no,
to
they didn't really look at breeds so much, or no breeds like jumped out in any of the audits as being an issue. So I've never seen any of that. I mean, when you start looking at quality challenges, once you knock the hide and hair off of them, you can't tell what breed it is if they're of good quality. So, and I say that loosely because I know that when you send stuff to a sale barn, it's totally going to get stereotyped and judged by, what it looks like on the outside, even though what's on the inside is what we're marketing. So that's a struggle. It really is, and something that I don't really know how to solve. But I know that's a frustration for a lot of folks that are selling cattle is, the stereotype of the breeds from the outside, even though, what we're most concerned about is your carcass quality on the inside. I did notice a question in the chat box here. Does what the cow eat affect the quality? Absolutely. Absolutely. So diet can certainly affect quality. And I use that, well, okay. One, yes, because, your diet will help put fat on. So you're affecting the fat that animal is putting on. But the other side of that in the subjective view of quality is, let's talk grass-fed versus grain-fed. Now, am I saying one is better than the other? Absolutely not. That's perceived quality. I grew up on grain-fed beef. That's what I'm accustomed to. If you grew up on a grass-finished beef diet, then you'd probably look at grain-fed beef as being of lower quality because it's not what you like. It's a preference, okay? But it is going to look different, right? So those animals that are strictly finished on a grass-fed diet or mostly grass-fed, grass-finished, the fat is going to have a yellow tinge to it from the keratin in the grass. It's going to probably be cooked different. It's probably not going to have quite as much marbling as what we're accustomed to in a grain finished carcass. Okay. So I also wanted to mention really quickly these from the cull cow, bull and cow market cow audit. Some of the things that were identified as quality challenges in those. Animal welfare and handling issues was a big one. Poor condition and nutrition, antibiotic residues, bruises, lameness and soundness, downer cows coming through the sale barn, and injection site prevalence and location. So just some things to keep in mind when we look at those sort of quality challenges is that, are we treating our cow herd with the same kid gloves that we're handling our feeder calves? We look at our feeder calves as like you have dollar signs in your eyes when you look at them because you're like, that's my product, right? That's what I'm selling. But somewhere down the line, Bessie's going to stop producing and you're going to need to sell her as well. She's going to end up in this cull cow market, and we want to make sure that we have a quality product on that end as well because she's still going into the food industry. Okay? That cull cow market really accounts for about 25% of the cattle industry. So it's a pretty big chunk, and we need to make sure that that's a quality product as well. She might not be quality reproductively, or she might not milk worth a toot, right? But she's going to be tasty when she gets harvested for the food market. Okay, so I started with all of that so that you have some basis when we start looking at some of these management practices. Why are we focusing on these quality issues is because we can affect that. We can have a big effect. So we can strive to hit industry targets through good genetics and management. We can strive to increase uniformity. And I don't mean uniformity like they're all the same color. I mean uniformity like they weigh the same. They're the same genetics. They are going to finish at the same time as a group, because that's what the feedlot's like. And then we can avoid some of those quality issues that we mentioned. So injection site lesions and abscesses, bruising, hide damage. Dark cutters is something that occurs from bad disposition and high stress cattle. They can cause this effect called dark cutters, which makes the beef dry, dark, and unpalatable. Okay? So let's start talking about how this affects BQA. So the mission of the Beef Quality Assurance Program is to maximize consumer confidence and the acceptance of beef by focusing the producer's attention to daily production practices that influence the safety, wholesomeness, and quality of beef and beef products. So what this program does, this educational program, is that it teaches us all of those practices that we can adopt so that we don't have those quality issues further down the line. And so the goal of BQA and what it's based on is, looking at those quality issues. So what are all the things that can go wrong? What are these quality issues that we see? And then we can make plans to prevent those from happening. So why is BQA important? Well, for one, beef is food, right? So whether you're producing purebred bulls or replacement heifers, or you're stockering calves, or you're producing feeder calves, whatever segment of the industry you're in or whatever you're producing, somewhere ultimately down the line, that animal is going to be food, right? And so we have to think of it in that context. Also, consumer confidence is key, right? So if that cute little soccer mom in Atlanta does not feel confident in the beef industry, she's not going to choose a pot roast from the grocery store to feed to her family. She don't know the front end of a cow from the back end of a cow, but she knows what she trusts to feed her kids. Okay. And then, lastly, we all hopefully would answer yes to this question, but would you eat what you produce? Now, most of us probably already do, right? So if you're in the cattle industry and you're not taking advantage of that, you've got a prime market there to feed yourself, but would you eat the product that you're producing? So the other thing to think about, unfortunately, is there are lots of animal activist groups like PETA and HSUS that are combating animal agriculture. And they have great big budgets, right? So every cute little sad celebrity that cries on the TV and asks for you to contribute to PETA because you think you're going to be saving shelter dogs, they're using that money to combat animal agriculture, unfortunately. And so they have these huge budgets that they work in Washington. They work in Washington, D.C. And so the beef industry has only a fraction of what these groups have to try to save our livelihood. And so the Beef Quality Assurance Program gives our lobbyists, our beef industry lobbyists, a way to fight back. And so they can use beef quality assurance certification numbers to document that cattle producers are doing what's right and using best management practices to produce a safe and wholesome product. And so, that makes me feel good. I am not a lobbyist, and I would not fare too well in Washington, D.C., but I know that by me being involved in this program and supporting our, the associations that are out there fighting for us, then, they can be my voice in those arenas. So let me give you a little history of the BQA program. So the term beef quality assurance originated in 1982 when the beef industry really needed some help to prevent additional government regulations. So it's not really a new concept. It's been around for 20 years. It was originally called the Beef Safety Assurance, and its early emphasis was on assuring the real and perceived safety of beef. And so what happened was a lot of antibiotic residues started showing up in beef products, like scary a lot, like probably what Chipotle puts on their billboards about, we use antibiotic free, blah, 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 blah. Well, everything is antibiotic free now, but it used to not be, right? So in the 80s, if you were eating beef, you might have gotten a little dose of something. So, but why this is that we just didn't have producer education available like we do now. So nobody knew what, the right guidelines to take. And so the NCBA BQA program was established in 1987, and it was there to educate and train producers to use best management practices. And like I said, it really focused on antibiotic use and injectable health products, in its beginning. And since then, it's much more than that now. And so BQA programming has expanded. It has information to help implement to improve quality grades and yield grades and, really just to help you be more profitable and more functional. So today there are more than 45 states participating in the BQA program. The states that don't participate really don't have any significant cattle numbers, and so they don't have their own state program. So benefits of the Beef Quality Assurance Program: 1, improved competitiveness and marketability. 2, being more informed because you learn about these production practices. 3, enhanced profitability. So it gives you a extra marketing tool to put with your cattle that you are BQA certified and that those cattle are being raised under BQA principles. And then also it helps strengthen consumer confidence. So I want to run through this really quick just to kind of, everybody reacts better to when you start talking profits, right? Because we all want to be profitable. So this is the value of BQA. Now, granted, this is to a 300 head. So 300 head, that's going to look really large, but we do equate it back to per animal here in a minute. So that will certainly ring true to however many cattle you're running. So handling cattle quietly provides 5 extra pounds of gain. In a 110 market, that equates to $5.50 per calf for that much return. By correctly storing, handling, and administering vaccines, we also get an additional 5 pounds, so we get more return. With correct product administration and stockmanship, we've reduced our death loss, so there's 2 calves that we weaned that we might not have. By keeping good working facilities, using proper transportation, and implementing good handling, a ranch avoids discounts that they would have gotten from their market cows and bulls. So there is more savings. Implementation of effective handling in the working facility lowers repair costs. So here's some more savings. And then good stockmanship and BQA leads to a safer work environment. This 300 head, they've got some employees, so they have a 5% decrease in workman's comp. So there's some more savings. So add it all up, this farm had nearly $18 a calf in total savings or increased revenues. So that's a pretty good chunk, right? I mean, as expensive as running cows are, we need to find ways. And all of these are things that did not cost this farm anything. It was all in practices, in things that management practices that they implemented that did not necessarily cost them any money to implement. Okay, so just to kind of recap that, BQA principles include thoughtful, responsible cattle management, okay? So, you know, there's no way we could ever list all of the do's and don'ts of cattle production or include that in an educational program, because really, and that changes, right, as more research is done. But what this does is provide guiding principles for you to mold and implement on your farm. So I say that in that BQA on my farm is going to look different than BQA on your farm. I have different cows. I have different, well, I don't have employees, but I have different family members that help me. I have different working facilities. I have a different market. You know, all of those things are going to help shape what BQA looks like on your operation. It's total quality management. So we want to be sure that we're providing products that meet or exceed the expectations and established requirements. So we have those quality thoughts in mind of what we want our goals to be, and then we're mapping out a plan to get to there, okay? And then HACCP-like considerations. So HACCP is what BQA is built off of, and that's hazard analysis critical control points. Sounds really fancy, right? It's a system that actually was designed by NASA, and all it does is says we need to look at all the things that could go wrong or all of the quality issues that we could have, and what do we need to do to prevent that from happening, okay? And so why I say NASA did that, right? They said, what are all the things that are going to blow up our spaceship? Now, what do we need to do to keep that from happening? Well, we need to kind of adopt the same mentality. What are the quality issues that we could have or that we see that might become an issue for us? And then what management principles do we need to implement to keep that from happening? Okay. So in the next little bit, and I realize we're getting close to stopping for questions, what I wanted to do is just quickly run through the highlights of the guidelines, just to kind of give you an idea of all of the facets that BQA touches on. Now, I have this kind of set up in a couple different ways. Some of them are just little slides. Some of them are questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and answer the question, or if you want to type that in the chat box, we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So here are all of the different sections that BQA covers, right? So behavior and handling, biosecurity, herd health, transportation, record keeping, nutrition, environmental quality control points, worker safety, and emergency action plan. So when you go through a full BQA training, these are basically the chapters that you go through and learn about. So let's start with behavior and handling. And so this is one of my favorite sections to teach in BQA, and really because good animal handling is one of the few things that you can do on your operation to improve your bottom line, improve, you know, the quality of your cattle, and it doesn't cost you anything, absolutely nothing. And so it really, in this section, we delve into looking at cattle behavior and how to utilize cattle behavior to use low stress animal handling. Okay, and there are gobs of studies out there that talk about the benefits of low stress animal handling. Not only is it good for the health of your animals, it's good for your own sanity too, right? I mean, working cattle is stressful. So implementing some of these things can make that a more pleasant experience. And so realizing that cattle behavior is influenced by three different things, right? Their innate instincts, right? They're herding animals. We can utilize that to our benefit. experiences that have developed because of conditioned learning. If working them is always stressful and they're always, there's a lot of anxiety if they, when they go to the working pen, if they're always getting beat and yelled at and prodded and it's, a high stress situation, then they're not going to want to come up there, right? So it's going to, they're going to be conditioned to not want to go to your working facility. Also looking at their sensory perceptions. So how they see, how they hear. Cattle are a prey species. A lot of times they look at us as a predator. Here's the question. Cattle have a wide angle field of vision. Anybody have any guesses as to how many degrees cattle can see? No stabs? Not even in the chat? You can message me privately if you don't want to share with the group. How wide a field of vision do you think? Thinking that 360 is all the way around them, right? I don't know that they can. I'm seeing some 180s. Okay. So cattle can actually see. Come on, change. They can see 300 degrees, right? So the 60 degrees that they cannot see is actually right behind them. So they have 60 degrees that are right behind them that, oh, I changed that. I'm so sorry. There we go. 60 degrees right behind them, a blind spot, So if you were to stand right behind an animal, can't see you. So most of the time they'll turn around to look at you. It's kind of interesting. So we can use that, right? And you'll see on this cute little diagram also the flight zone and the point of balance, and those are all things that we get into and how to utilize those things to move those cattle. Okay. All right, so we just got a few more things to hit really quickly. Biosecurity. I've learned a lot about biosecurity since moving to North Georgia because we got a lot of poultry industry folks up here, and they have their stuff together when it comes to biosecurity. But we'll run through these pretty quick. I realize I've taken a good bit of time. So what biosecurity does is we want to look at potential sources of disease and then how we could keep those from entering our farms. So whether that be isolating new cattle or restricting movement between herds, making sure that our feedstuffs are not contaminated. Those are all things we can look at as far as biosecurity. Herd health management is another big sector to focus on. And so this becomes in managing our herd health program and really our injectable health products. And so where would you think the best site for vaccination and injectable vaccination administration would be? I see an A. Anybody else?
A.
A. Very good. A. Yes. We want to keep all of our injectables in that triangular mass of the neck muscle. So we want to give shots in the neck of that animal because it's going to be our sacrifice zone, right? There's not a valuable cut in the neck of the cow. You don't go to the steakhouse and say, bring me that neck cut, because it's just not very tasty. But we want to avoid the important cuts that really do bring us some money, right? So the round, the loin, etc. So things to think about when we're working cattle, receiving, acclimating, making sure they're identified, taking care of our needles and syringes, managing our injection sites. Okay. Transportation, things to think about when you're moving those cattle to make sure that they are transported safely from point A to point B. A lot of times that's to our sale location, which is where we really want to make sure that we're maintaining the highest quality possible. Record keeping is a huge part of BQA, should be a huge part of your farm, your farm as well. Not only production records, but BQA is really going to focus on keeping our processing records when we're working those cattle. So true or false, you should always keep records of all products administered, including what you used, the serial number, amount administered, the route that you gave it, who administered, and withdrawal time. Is that true or false?
True.
True. Yes, absolutely. We want to keep all of those things. And that can really pay off for us further down the line, especially when it comes to marketing those cattle, because we want to make sure that we don't market before that withdrawal time on that product is up. Okay. And that's how we reduce antibiotic residues, is because the withdrawal time gives us the amount of time from when that product is given to when that drug is out of that animal system. Okay. So nutrition, the important thing to realize with nutrition is that, nutritional health greatly influences our animal health as well, right? So a nutritionally stressed animal, it doesn't matter how many animal health products we give it, it's not going to work appropriately. Also, we talked about how diet can affect quality. It's going to affect everything that we do, right? Growth of those animals, we're raising breeding stock, getting those rebred, how well those mama cows are doing. Nutrition plays a hand in all of those things. The environmental quality control points really focuses on environmental stewardship. So looking at grazing and how well we're caring for our soil and water quality. So of these grazing systems, which one would be more efficient and should contribute to less runoff, better soil health, and healthier pastures? Continuous stocking or rotational grazing?
Rotation.
Yeah, rotational grazing, that's right. So the more efficient we can be with utilizing our grass and our pastures, the healthier our soil and our environment is going to be. And this is just a chart to look at. You'll see, continuous stocking is only about 30 to 40% efficient. As you add more rotations all the way up to strip grazing and daily rotations, which is 70 to 80% efficient. Worker safety really just focuses on maintaining a safe workplace. I know on a lot of smaller farms like mine, we do not have employees. It is all family run, but we want to make sure that we're maintaining a safe place for everybody to work. If you do have employees or you have help that comes in to help you, make sure that they are properly trained or that they're at least experienced in handling cattle or know what they're doing so that they don't put others at risk. And our last section is just emergency action planning, which is kind of, I moved from South Georgia where we did have hurricane risks every now and then to North Georgia where usually we just get a lot of rain. But, having an emergency action plan in case of a natural disaster or any kind of emergency is important. Phone numbers, maps of your farm, where everything is located. Or even if it's just a family emergency, like the main herdsman, whoever is usually in charge of those cattle is, out of pocket, that somebody else knows what's going on. Okay, I ran through that really fast. I apologize for taking a little more of your time, but, I just wanted, I don't mean to make it scary, but BQA emphasizes on doing things appropriately. Nowadays consumers, they like to know their farmer, so they're watching us, right? They're watching those of us that are producing beef and or their food, and so they want to they're watching, and so you don't want mismanagement to be captured. Cell phones have made that pretty easy to capture mismanagement. So BQA training, they take a couple of hours to get through. Once you have that, it's good for 3 years. We maintain a database in the state with those numbers. After 3 years, you can either go through the program again, or there are recertification opportunities, like recertification hours, much like a private pesticide license, that you can earn to be able to maintain that certification. If you're not able to come to a live training, there is an online version. If you go to bqa.org, it will take you to the online, and you can go through the system that way. All right, last thing I wanted to show you really quickly is this cool commercial that NCBA did. So I'll share that with you, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Doing things the right way. Not quite the golden rule, but it's up there. Holding yourself to a higher standard, even when no one's looking. Your dad did it. His dad too. When the time is right, you'll pass it along. At National Cattlemen's Beef Association, we're for anyone who takes pride in doing things the right way. For more than 30 years, our Beef Quality Assurance Training and Certification Program has been guiding ranchers, veterinarians, and transportation professionals. BQA has become the standard for proper management techniques of the beef industry. It's a commitment to quality and improved profitability that helps raise consumer confidence in the safety and quality of their food. BQA programs educate and train professionals dedicated to moving the cattle industry forward. Professionals who take that responsibility seriously. The ones who've never cut a single corner or spoken the words good enough. BQA is for cattlemen who believe doing things the right way is the only way. And that's never going to change.
So, like I said, it's really just doing things right and using common sense. A lot of it is just common sense, but it's a lot of it's things that can very easily be implemented into your daily production practices, and it's really keeping your eye on producing that end product and producing the highest quality product that you can. So with that, I will entertain any questions that anybody has.
Hi, yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. I guess the question I have is kind of a generalized question. In terms of the quality grade and the yield grade, again, it's data from more of the commercial market. Is there any data or anyone looking at the smaller producers, those that are not quite meeting the 300 head, or they may just have 100 head? Is there any data available for that market?
So there's a couple of different ways to kind of get an idea of where you stand, right? So that's always the big problem, and why, I really emphasize that communication among the sectors becomes an issue, is because a lot of times when you market your calves, if you sell them to a feedlot, you don't ever know how they grade, right? So you don't really know how you're doing. There are some programs to get involved with. One of them is called a retained ownership program, where you actually own those cattle all the way through harvest. You're contracting with a feeder. The Georgia Beef Challenge is an example of that, where you retain the ownership through the packing plant, and then you get carcass data back. So you kind of know where you stand. The other things you can utilize, though, is, selecting genetics that do have high carcass quality, and use that as one of your selection tools. Now, granted, that doesn't really let you know what you're doing on the other end, but it can help you move you in that direction. Now, if you're selling, like let's say you're selling off the farm, so you're in the direct to consumer market, it does get a little tougher, because those custom abattoirs, they're not grading that beef in their harvest facilities, but you can talk with them in, maybe looking at kind of where you stand. Also, any kind of personal testimonials from folks that you're selling beef to off the farm, of them having a good eating experience are things that you can use to kind of emphasize the quality of your product. I know that didn't give you the best answer because it's hard. It's hard for us as cow-calf producers to know what our cattle are doing further down the line, especially for the smaller producer.
You had a question in the chat box about carcass quality and ultrasound.
Thank you.
So the carcass ultrasound is mostly used on purebred animals because they're collecting that data, that performance data, to use in marketing those as breeding stock. But those measurements that are taken with the ultrasound machine are pretty much like they would be if that animal was hanging on the rail. So you can collect a ribeye area, you can collect a percent marbling, you can also get back fat. So you can figure quality grade and yield grade on a live animal utilizing that carcass ultrasound. So it's pretty cool technology. Like I said, a lot of seed stock producers are utilizing that technology to be able to prove that sires have good carcass genetics. So yeah, absolutely, it can be used as a marketing tool.
If it's not too personal, what genetics do you use?
We have kind of a different market. So we have a 75% of our herd is purebred. So we're selling a lot of seed stock. So we have some Hereford cattle, and we have what's called Murray Gray, which kind of look like a gray Angus. It's a breed that came with my husband. He's from Indiana. But I've learned to really like them. They're very forage efficient, very similar to an Angus. But we're selling them as purebred. So like we'll keep bulls and some heifers to sell as seed stock. But everything that we're steering and the little bit of commercial that we have, we're marketing as groups in the sale barn.
On this video session, we have folks that are beef cattle producers from other states.
The way BQA is disseminated into the states is that the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, they dictate the guidelines, but then the state just implements it. So every state, it might look a little different, so it just might be delivered different, but the information is exactly the same. So, if they wanted to all go through the same program, we could work with the states that they're from to make sure they're certified in that state, even if they went through our program. Or they could, if it's more convenient for them to go through their own state's program, that would be fine as well, because they're all weighted exactly the same. Or they could even go through the online if they wanted.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. See, I had a question in the chat box. How does the beef from the Akashi rate versus beef from Angus? So I've seen some of the Akashi animals. They're supposedly ranked kind of up there with Wagyu, which is, what produces the Kobe beef from Japan. So they're probably gonna marble a little better. The great thing about the Akashi is that they yield better than the Wagyu breed. So I've seen some really good things. I think those are Akashis, what they're raising down at Chantel Farms there in Tattnall County. The farm that FPL is running down there, I think that's the breed that they're crossing with some of their stuff. So I've heard good things. I don't know how prevalent they are, like how much breeding stock is available.
So Carole, we had a question earlier about breeds and the audit question. And when you look at breeds, like you said, genetics, and within that breed can tell us a lot about the likelihood of grading choice at a certain weight or being too big for the box, because obviously if you're raising a breed that is a frame score 9, it could get too big for the box.
Oh yeah, and you're not gonna want to feed a frame score 9.
Right, exactly. And we talked about that at a recent workshop on a Saturday. We talked about how, the frame score impacts a lot of things in production, and it would impact quality grade and size if you have large frame scores. So I think that within, like, the audit itself probably didn't recognize specific breeds, but like you were pointing out, there are some breeds, genetic lines that are more likely.
Absolutely, Nikki. So yeah, it did not identify breed specifically, but if you're looking for, well, it's a balance, right? So you're looking for high yield, but you don't want something that's too big, and you want high quality. So it's that perfect mix of quality and yield, which, to me lends towards a crossbred animal, right? Because, those continental breeds are going to be the ones that put on a lot of yield. And certainly you can get some British breeds that put on a lot of yield, but you want to balance that with something that's going to have more marbling and a higher quality grade. So yeah, so you can infer the characteristics of certain breeds in saying that what's going to be more preferred.
That's kind of what they do at the sale barns. They look at breed type, what they look like, and they try to guess what that carcass is going to be. And so if you put through a very small framed animal, they know that animal is going to finish a lot faster in the feedlot than some of the larger frame. And they may not want that because the yield, like you said, the yield is going to be less. They're going to fatten too much and get that excess fat, those kind of things. So
absolutely. And it brings to the point of what an excellent job Angus has done with marketing their breed, right? So, when you take the hide off of something, you can't tell if it's a black Angus, like you can't. But you ask any Joe off the street to name a breed of cattle, and they know a black Angus because Hardee's has a black Angus burger and it's delicious. Like they've done a stupendous job in marketing their breed as a high quality breed, whether it really is or not.
We know, like you said, a quality product comes in many different breeds.
Oh yeah, it comes in all kinds of colors. Well, guys, I really appreciate y'all having me. I hope that I will be visiting with you guys again at some point, maybe to do a BQA training. And as always, I'm available. Dr. Whitley and Stefan both have my contact information. So if you guys come up with questions later on down the line, or I can help with anything, please feel free to reach out. Because I like talking cows.
Well, thank you so much for your time and the great presentation. And we certainly will be in touch because I know I would like to host a BQA training at the university. Have a great evening.